Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. Hello, we're back.
We are. This is the first episode of season 3.
It's a little weird.
It is. How did that happen?
I've forgotten how to do this podcast thing now. Just kidding. I didn't actually get a break.
No, you did not, because you do all the editing.
But I did have time to do all the stuff I needed to get a book out. So
Yes, you did that too.
That has been taking all my time.
Really? A book takes that much work?
Yeah, because now it's all marketing stuff. I've done the work and I've gotten it up there and just waiting for release day on February 1st. And now it's like so much marketing stuff.
And what is the name of this book?
It is The Business of Short Stories, Writing, Submitting, Publishing, and Marketing by Shannon Lawrence. Yeah,
and
all about the short story world.
And a fine book it is.
A fine book. It was a great cover. The covers always get lots of compliments. My husband makes them.
It is a good cover.
It's bright.
I think.
It has sticky notes. I mean, what author doesn't use sticky notes or love them or have some sort of a weird obsession with them?
Even if you don't use them for your writing, you
have them.
I don't just buy sticky notes. I buy the super stick sticky notes.
Oh.
They have the super adhesive ones. Not only that, I bought some and took them to my job. And took them there, and I'm like, I walk around when I want a note to stay.
Right?
People are like, how come you always have sticky notes? Because they're in my fucking locker.
Yeah.
I bought them. I know where the stash is.
Writers also tend to have like an office supply fetish of some manner or another, whether it's pens. We have a friend who collects the really nice, like ones that you dip in ink. Like, I don't know what the official quills. Fountain pens. We had Post-it notes that were size of the giant desk calendar out in the garage for a while.
We had the desk calendar one.
Yeah.
We used to hang that when the girls were younger, when they were in high school. Oh my God. I hung that in the kitchen, and every month I would write all the stuff on it, and then you could put the sticky notes all over it, and at the end of the month,
I remember seeing those. I do have a desk. That's what we still use, but I do still have high schoolers. So it's the giant desk calendar, but it's up on a magnetized metal sheet on our wall outside the kitchen.
And you still lose track of something.
Well, I'll tell you what. I do not lose track of anything. However, family members fail to report shit to me to put on there.
Yes.
First, like, my husband is notorious for writing it down after I've bitched at him because, I mean, I plan the week, right? And then, he has an HOA meeting or whatever. And he's like, oh, I have the HOA meeting tonight. I'm like, excuse me? That was on the calendar, so he goes and he writes on the calendar then.
Because you plan dinner around him.
Yeah. That's the big thing, actually, is planning dinner around
it. It's like, who's going to be here and what time? I can feed everybody at different times, but only if I know they're going to be here at different times.
Right.
So.
Anyway. Moving on from that frustration.
And notebooks.
Oh, yeah, notebooks.
Journals.
Galore.
You can never have too many.
No, you can't. And then you can have ones that you don't write in.
They're too nice.
They're too nice. And you're like, I have to save this for something special. But nothing is ever special enough for it.
That is very, very true.
I've been trying to okay, the next thing I need a notebook for, I'm going to use one of my nice notebooks that's never going to get used so it doesn't just sit there anymore. Of course, I say nice. And here's this one right here. This is one of the ones that hasn't been written in. It's The Howling.
I saw that sitting there. I'm like, that is so cool.
So I don't want to put something in there. It's from the Nocturnal Readers box that I used to get, the monthly horror thing until it went kaboom and imploded. Yeah. So.
Too bad. So you belong to the Books of Horror group on Facebook, don't you? So there's a subgroup off of that called Book Swap. I think it's just the Books of Horror Book Swap group. Mm-hmm. And at certain times of the year, if you want to take part in this book swap, and they tell you up front, it's going to cost you an ass load to ship stuff because books are heavy. Yeah. And they're like, you have to commit to buying, you have to commit to sending a minimum amount. You can't just send somebody a waterlogged paperback and call it good. So I did it a couple of years ago at Christmas time, and I did it this year. One of the books I got, I just handed off to Shannon because I had already read it. So I was like, yeah, I liked it. I think you'll like it. But here's the thing I'm going to mention. I told you, I'm going to work this in somehow. I got a book I don't think I've read it, but it is from an author whom I do not like as a person.
Yes, who we've met and have had to deal with and has been awful every time.
Yep, and I'm not going to name that person. I'm not going to give any hints. However, I thought, what am I going to do with this book? Because books are important to me. Books are like sacred objects.
Yeah.
I decided I'm going to throw it away. I'm not going to recycle it. I am not going to donate it. I'm not going to donate it. I'm not going to try to find it at home. I'm simply throwing it in the trash.
Yeah. And I have one that I'm not just going to simply throw in the trash. I'm going to rip it into little pieces and then I'm going to throw in the trash because somehow this person who I'm also not going to name, I'm not going to name the book, got away with something that was hideously racist and offensive and that they had no right to write about because they're not Native American, and introduced me to stereotypes even I didn't know existed. And I am just enraged. And I went on Goodreads and because I'm doing the reading challenge, and it sadly was the first thing I finished for the year. And so gave it a low rating and looked at the reviews to see if I was the only one. And sure enough, nope. Native American woman posted in the comments this huge review, just how offensive this was, and promptly was told by a bunch of white ladies why she was wrong and just missed what the author was trying to do, and basically policed whether she was allowed to be offended. And that just enraged me further. And so I had to move on from that rage spiral. And I'll be doing it by destroying the first book I have ever destroyed.
I don't think I've ever thrown a book away.
If I actually had a wood-burning fireplace, I'd probably tear it in tiny pieces and burn it. But I have a gas fireplace and a pellet stove. I guess I could save it for the cabin.
Or you have a barbecue.
No, I could save it and just burn the shit out of it at the cabin. And let the ashes go up into the sky. And just fucking kill it. We'll see. I don't think I want to hold on to it that long.
You could burn it. You know what? I would pee on the ashes. I would. But I'm vindictive that way. But however, I'm going to talk about one because I brought it. I can't give you this one because it's a library book. So a friend of mine posted, it was one of these, the 32 best books that were published in 2021. And I usually glance at these lists and go, well, can I pat myself on the back and feel good about myself because I've read one thing on this list?
Yeah.
And usually the answer is no. Because they're very Tony, very book clubby.
Yes.
Very highly written literary.
Literary.
Okay. This one, however, not only did I get this one from the library, I also bought one of the books and gave it to Joe as a Christmas present. And so this one is called The Trees. And it's a novel by Percival Everett. And a pair of detectives from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation are called into Money, Mississippi to investigate a series of brutal murders. And what they find at each crime scene is an unexpected second dead body, that of a man who resembles Emmett Till.
Yeah.
Who was murdered. This is a famous case. After meeting resistance from the local sheriff, his deputy, the coroner, and a string of racist white townsfolk, the MBI detectives suspect these are killings of retribution. I don't want to say more. It starts out as kind of quirky, and there is a lot of humor in the beginning, which is not the thread of humor continues, but it's not a comedic novel by any means. But it gets more and more serious as it goes on, and I found it. It's not often that a book gobsmacks me. It's not often that a book is something completely unexpected. And I went, wow, whoever said this was one of the best books of the year, I think was absolutely right.
Cool. Because the thing about those books, I mean, if they're based on sales, it's going to always be the same high-selling authors. But a personal list is going to be half the time, like for me, if I'm reading a horror list, right, depending upon who's writing it, they're just going to be putting their buddies up there.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I have a problem with a lot of lists.
But this one seemed to be, from what I could tell, really well-rounded. And like I said, The Trees, I read it in a day.
Okay.
So, but I could not put it down. Once it got going, I just couldn't. I think I might have read it on New Year's Day. Not New Year's Day, the day after. January 2nd.
New Year's the 2nd.
New Year's the 2nd.
Okay.
I had to work on New Year's Day.
See, I read a Froofy book. That's a lot. I read It's Yours Cruelly, Elvira by Cassandra Peterson.
Oh, I still want to read that.
Which, it was just really good. So people might not know, I mean, until they read the book, that she spent a large chunk of her youth in Colorado Springs, where we live. And so it was like reading Hidden Valley Road, where I got to see this. You have this insight into what the town looked like back, before I was born, actually. But for both of those, I think. But yeah, it's just fascinating. But she was living a whole different Hidden Valley Road. You're talking about an Air Force family, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're living in this area that I hadn't previously known had started because it was Air Force families, even though it's not technically on what is their property now, which is fascinating to me. And then Elvira lived off of downtown, and she went and she go-go danced, and she went to all these clubs, and she saw the bands that came through, and it was so fun reading it. And of course her experiences, but I've been an Elvira fan forever. Obs. But yeah, it was really good, and it was fun just reading it. And her tone, I mean, her tone is what her character kind of, she has a sense of humor. She's a little bit sarcastic, and that comes across in
She definitely has a sense of humor about how she's made her money.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't easy, and she didn't hit big time. Boy, she was doing this shit forever, and even now you can't say she hit big time. I mean, she's maybe known by some more people, and she made some money, but it was all bit by bit by bit.
Yeah. That woman worked her ass off.
She worked her ass off. She lost a bunch of it to an ex.
Oh.
So, yeah, and of course the big news about it was she came out as having been with the person who's been her assistant, who was actually like a physical trainer of hers at the beginning and all this stuff. And she was like, believe me, I did not expect that I would go for a woman, but they've been together over a decade. So that was the big news. I saw an article the other day about she lost like 11,000 followers the day after her book came out, and it came out that she'd come out. She said, so I lost the perverted men and gained 60,000.
Wow.
Of people who are, and there were people posting, they're like, we already claimed you in the gay community though, because she was kind of like Cher. Like Elvira was big in the gay community to start with, or in the rainbow community completely, but
because they both had these kind of campy performance personas.
Yes.
That was it's easy for other people to, I don't want to say imitate and be recognized. Like, I could dress up as Cher, and although I look nothing like her, and certainly if I opened my mouth to sing would sound nothing like her, you would know. I would walk in the room and you would go, that's Cher.
Yeah.
Or you are attempting to be Elvira.
Yeah. You would always know somebody who was copying them. But she dated some fascinating people, and like there's people, and she's talking about Bobby and with this nice guy who kind of saved her from a guy who was yelling at her and about to get physical, and it turns out it's Robert frickin' De Niro, and
oh my God.
It's just stuff like that. You know, her big thing was she was a major groupie for a while. And the situation she got herself into with some of these bands, it's absolutely astounding that she didn't have more awful thing. And she admits in the book, she's the first one to say, I got really lucky because I did stupid things and put myself in dangerous situations as a groupie, going to their rooms, finding somebody and knocking on the doors in the hotel until they heard music coming from one that was somebody on a guitar or whatever, and knocking on the door and being brought in with just the men in the band. And
did she know Sweet Connie?
I don't know.
Sweet Connie is what is it? Grand Funk were an American band. Sweet Connie doing her act. Connie is a real person.
Okay. Well, no, because she wasn't traveling with them around the country. She wasn't that type of like almost famous groupie. She was just trying to meet as many of these bands as possible and party with them who came through the Springs in Denver.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so kind of a different kind. But it'll lower the way you think about some famous people because she doesn't pull her punches. And some of the people that did some awful shit, and then there are some that you're like, oh, like suddenly you see that they're actually The Zappa dad.
Frank.
Okay, she met him. And she was like, he was fatherly to me. And he wasn't screwing around with like, you know, he didn't have a female groupie on him. And he wasn't doing this. And he talked to her.
But wasn't there a book that came out by a girl who was... She started out as a groupie and became his girlfriend?
Possibly.
I think. You know what? My memory is... There's nothing. There's a big wall of gray fog in my head right now. So I'm like, it might have been Frank Zappa. It might not have been.
No, it wasn't that. She couldn't say that he wasn't ever cheating.
Right.
It was that when a young girl came into the room, unlike the rest of the leches, he was good to her and was fatherly and wasn't trying to get into a 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old, whatever, into their pants. Like so many, these other guys didn't care how old she was, including a big guy in Vegas. So, ugh. But yeah, it's one of those fun. There's a little bit of the gossip like that, but it's not her just purposely tearing apart a bunch of people.
Right.
Who are famous or whatever.
She was honestly
lived a fascinating life. There's so much beyond Elvira. She was in Italy for a while, stranded there with no money, and the shit she gets up to there, just trying to survive, and then what happens. It's just, there's a lot.
Wow.
It's a really good book.
I'm going to read that.
Highly recommend.
See, we've given you two things to read that we are both very massively excited about.
Yeah.
I'm like, I have to find someone who's read Trees because I'm dying to talk
to somebody.
Yes, because I can't give too much away.
It's one of those.
Yes.
Shall we get started?
Shall we?
If you're thinking of starting a podcast or even just starting to research it, Buzzsprout is your go-to source for information and hosting. They have tons of videos and write-ups on everything you need to know about recording and distributing a podcast, and they even provide easy ways to get analytics on how your podcast is doing. We use Buzzsprout for our podcast hosting, and through them we've been able to connect with tons of resources and distributors. Following a link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know we sent you, gets you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and helps support our show. A win-win. Not only do they help you get started, but they also do small things to encourage you, such as awarding you badges as you hit various milestones. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world.
I have entitled my little piece today, Really, Kansas? I don't even know how I stumbled across this. Because I was like, what do I want to do for the first episode? And I'm looking at different places and I'm searching different keywords, and I come across the Bender family.
Yeah.
And I've got a little more to go on after that. I actually got it. It just worked out chronologically. Anyway, my sources are like, what the fuck is in the water in Kansas? My sources are the lovely and talented Wikipedia, the esteemed Library of Congress, and the History of Yesteryear.
All right.
So you've obviously heard of the Benders, also known as the Bloody Benders. The family that slays together, stays together. I had to say it. This was an entire family of serial killers who played and slayed in southeastern Kansas in Labette County, which is toward Oklahoma and Missouri, for about a year and a half, from mid-1871 to the end of 1972. Yeah, they were there for a century. The family consisted of, it's 18, not 19.
Misbehaving really makes you live long.
It does. So, nicknamed the Bloody Benders, the family consisted of John and Elvira and their children, right?
What a coincidence.
And their children, John Jr. and Kate. Although there is some question about whether Kate was a product of John and Elvira's marriage, if she was a product of one of Elvira's earlier marriages, or whether she married into the family.
Okay.
So it's not entirely... That's the thing about this family. A lot of times when I come in, I say, well, so-and-so was born here, and so-and-so was born here, and moved here, and did this and did that. Nuh-uh. There are so many rabbit holes you can go down trying to figure out where these people came from and who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all qualified by might have gone by. So I'm like, I'm not going to play with the might haves. I would be talking for 3 hours.
And it could be them, could not.
Yeah. So, backing the truck up a little bit, there were 5 families of spiritualists homesteading in Labette County in October of 1870. So, spiritualists are defined as people who believe that the spirits of the dead exist just beyond where we are, and they want to communicate with us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't know. Do they?
Do they
really
just want to be done with us?
Yeah. So the John Jr. and John Sr. had 160 acres next to the Osage Trail, which was the only road for traveling farther west at the time. So they built a cabin, dug a well, and built a barn with a corral. The women folk joined them in the fall of 1871. And this is what got me. This is what life was like back then. So they tacked a canvas sheet up in the cabin.
Mm-hmm.
In back of the cabin, that's where they lived.
Mm-hmm.
That's where 4 people lived. In the front was sort of a general store where there were some dry goods sold and meals or lodging could be purchased. And by lodging, I don't mean you got a room. I mean, you got a space to sleep on the floor. There's also evidence that Kate's favors were sold as well.
Hmm?
This does not...
Whatever brings in money.
Exactly. But this was her idea. That part of it, she was not forced into this. The women planted a giant garden and an apple orchard. It was a 2-acre garden. And I can't imagine, I can't keep a pot of tomatoes alive. I can't imagine tending a 2-acre garden. So John, who was 60, and Elvira, who was 55 at this time, were German and at first glance didn't speak much English. John may have had a speech impediment. Elvira was also considered unfriendly. They called her a she-devil.
Oh, wow.
And while they're presumed to be German immigrants, but there's no proof exactly where they came from or even if Bender was their original name. So, for purposes of this report, their name is Bender. Elvira, for being so unfriendly, was rumored to have married and murdered several men. That's pretty good for an unfriendly she-devil.
She was friendly enough.
Apparently. There is no proof that she married and murdered men. She claimed to have had 12 children with Simon Mark, with a prior husband named Simon Mark, and some said that Kate was her daughter by Simon Mark. Again, don't know for sure. Now, John Jr., who was approximately 25, was supposed to be a handsome man. He had auburn hair and mustache. I'm like, all right. He spoke English with a German accent, and that he was considered somewhat flighty. And people cited the fact that he would laugh kind of aimlessly.
Oh,
as
maybe he had funny thoughts.
Perhaps. I've been known to laugh out loud with no...
Oh, Jesus. I do all the time. I'm really funny in my head sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Or I'll remember something. But that...
Oh, yeah. I'll remember, like, images of something. Uh-huh. I can actually just straight crack up to the point of tears if it's the right thing.
Exactly. So, anyhow, laughter makes you flighty. Kate was around 23. She was very educated and attractive and did not have very much of an accent at all. Spoke perfect English. She was an active spiritualist, advertising her ability to commune with the spirits and heal people. Mm-hmm. So she conducted seances and lectured on spiritualism, but that kind of ruined her reputation because she was a big advocate for free love. There's even a diary entry where she talks about... That's why there's a question about whether this was actually her brother or her husband, because Junior, because there's this whole thing about why shouldn't I have sex with him? I'm like, alrighty then. That is not what this story is about. Okay. In May of 1871, a man's body is found with the skull crashed. That too. The skull was crushed and the throat was slashed.
Oh.
That's why I messed that up. My eyes can work faster than my mouth, which is really hard to believe, considering how fucking fast my mouth works sometimes. In February of 1872, 2 more men were found with the same injuries. Now, by 1873, reports of missing persons were so prevalent that travelers had started avoiding the whole area. Mm-hmm. That's where the worm started to turn. In the winter of 1872, a man named George Longcore and his infant, although I think it was actually toddler, daughter left Independence, Kansas for Iowa and were never seen again. So, spring of 1873, Longcore's neighbor, a Dr. William York, went looking for them. So he reached Fort Scott, which was where they had been headed, with no luck, and turned around to go home, but he disappeared. So, Dr. York had two brothers. One was Ed, Colonel Ed, who lived at Fort Scott. And then Alexander was a Civil War veteran, a lawyer, and a Kansas state senator. So he took up the search for his brother with 50 men. They questioned every traveler they could find, visited every homestead on the path. They went everywhere. So on March 28th, Colonel York and our friend arrived at Bender's Inn, and the Bender said yes, that William had stayed there, but that he had been fine when he left, and they suggested that he had run into trouble with Indians after he left.
Of course.
They said yes, that was certainly a possibility, and left. Less than a week later, York was back because a woman had fled the inn after Elvira threatened her with a knife. So here's the interesting thing. When questioned, first, Elvira could not speak English, or spoke very little, very broken English. Then she just came out with this outburst that the woman was a witch who had cursed her coffee. I'm like, so, yeah.
Sorry, no sprechen, but that bitch poisoned my coffee. I just need to tell you.
Yes. And she ordered the men to leave. So Kate, at this point, pulls York aside and says, if you will return alone in a couple of days, I will help you with my clairvoyance. I will help you to speak with your brother and find him. So remember that York is traveling with armed men, so they want to hang the Benders right now. York insisted they needed to have evidence first. So calmer heads prevailed, which I have to commend him for that.
We have, laws about that kind of thing now.
Exactly. So about the same time, neighboring communities got together. It was like a big town meeting, only several towns, because they were upset about these disappearances because they were losing business and friends and neighbors. I mean, So they agreed to get search warrants for all the homesteads in the surrounding area. Okay, so a few days later, a neighbor passing the Bender homestead realizes that it has been abandoned because the animals are outside in the corral and they have not been fed. So in those days, if you drove by or walked by and the animals hadn't been fed, you stopped and fed them. A search party was formed. He goes back into town and because they weren't in town, they were outside of town. So he goes back into town. They form a search party and they discover there's no food, no clothing, and no personal effects in the cabin. But there is a really bad smell. Folks, you can't kill people without there being bad smells. So they found a small cellar under the cabin with blood, a lot of blood, on the floor. And apparently it was very small. It was like 6 foot. It was a tiny little cellar. So they picked up and moved the cabin so that they could dig underneath it. Now I'm like, wait, I've lost my place in my notes. So they started to dig underneath, but they didn't find anything under the cabin. So they started testing the ground around the cabin and the garden and the orchard by probing with a metal rod. They found the body of Dr. York in the orchard. They marked 9 potential sites before midnight when they called off the search. They came back in the morning, unearthed 8 bodies in 9 of the graves, all with their heads bashed and their throat cut. They also found the body of a young woman without an apparent cause of death, so they feared that she was buried alive. She was injured, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like she was pristine, but they didn't find any injuries that would account for her death. They also found a body plus assorted body parts in the well.
Oh.
Yeah.
And they just didn't care that they were going to be using that well.
Apparently. So the angry mob that had assembled tortured the Bender's neighbor, but he couldn't provide...
The neighbor?
Yes. Well, this will come around to the neighbor again.
Okay.
how they I said torture, but it comes up again later. They actually hanged him. They strung him up by his neck and hanged him for a little bit.
A little bit.
And then let him down. They did this 3 times.
Ugh.
And after the 3rd time, they did let him go, but they figured he really doesn't know anything.
Oh my God.
Right? We just hanged him a little bit.
Let's not be too hasty with the benders themselves, y'all. But we're going to torture the neighbor a little bit. A little bit.
So when the story got out, with the story about what had been found at the cabin got out, curiosity seekers numbering 3,000 or more descended on the site. They dismantled the entire cabin. Every scrap of the cabin was gone for souvenirs, including bricks from the cellar and stones from the well. But the Benders had scarpered, and the rewards were offered for them. The guy's brother offered $1,000, and then the state offered an additional $2,000. Mm-hmm. It appears that what happened was, because apparently some people stepped forth afterward and said, yes, that could have happened to me. What they would do is they would seat a guest over the trap door leading to the cellar, and one of the women would talk to him, and one of the men would step out from behind the curtain and bash him with a hammer. Then one of the women would cut his throat, and they dropped the body in the basement until they could bury it on the property. So does this remind you of anything?
Reminds me of a lot of things.
Does it remind anybody of Sweeney Todd?
Oh yeah, I was thinking of Sonny Bean, who is a real life.
Yes. So I looked it up. The original story, because I'm getting a whole Sweeney Todd. I'm like, did they make fucking meat pies? But that's next week.
We led you down a dark and sordid path.
So the original story that Sweeney Todd was based on was called The String of Pearls, and it was published in 1846 or 47. But there is no indication that the Benders were big readers, so...
No.
And they were certainly not the first to come up with this idea, or the only ones. Anyway, the Benders disappeared. There's a huge hunt on for them, and it appeared that the 4 of them separated. Now, there's one story that the 2 younger Benders went south, and the 2 older Benders went north. There's also a story that Junior and Senior went together, and the 2 women went together. Despite claims, there are all kinds of claims that the men were found and hanged or torn apart or shot or beaten to death. There's no evidence, and the rewards were never claimed. And $1,000 or $2,000, well, $3,000 total, that was not small change in those days. No. I mean, it's not small change now. No. To some of us, but there's absolutely no evidence anywhere that they were found. So for a while, any mother and daughter traveling together of approximately the right age would be arrested for being Elvira and Kate.
Yeah.
I mean, they actually, what's it called when you bring them back from a different state?
Yeah.
They were...
The word just went.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they brought 2 women back from Michigan. And tried them, even though there were people going, no, they had documentation that these 2 women were not the Bender women. So nobody knows. Nobody knows what happened to the Benders. Did they live out their lives? Did they do this again? Now I'm going to get back to the neighbors. Several of the neighbors were arrested for selling goods, like horses, wagons, personal belongings that belonged to the murdered people. Mm-hmm. So that's why they tortured that guy. Gotcha. He may not have been involved in the killing, but he knew that it was going on. He knew it was happening. He just didn't know.
And they probably were like, hey, don't tell anybody about this. We got to live, Here's a wagon to sell.
Yeah, can you get rid of this for us?
And you can keep the... funds or whatever. And that's how you keep your neighbors quiet when they're living along the Osage Trail.
So you would think one murdering family would be enough for Kansas, but no. A few years and about 230 miles northwest of the Bloody Benders, the Kelly family was operating near Oak City between August and December of 1887. Now, the family consisted of William and Kate. What was the name Kate? Son Billy and daughter Kit. They had moved from the mountains of Pennsylvania to Kansas in 1869. They worked with cattle, but then they settled into running a tavern. And local opinion of this family was that although they were illiterate, they were just a regular family. They were just regular working folk. He was so
like quiet. Every neighbor that ever gets right interviewed.
Yep. So
I just thought the screams coming from his house were,
movies.
It
was the video game he was watching.
Fine.
So when travelers in this area began disappearing, absolutely nobody suspected the Kelly family. So then in December of 1887, it was discovered that their home was empty and had been abandoned, but they hadn't told anyone in their community that they were leaving. So it was kind of like, they noticed that the house was empty and like knocked and nobody answered. So somebody who had been to their tavern before went to check on the house. He didn't know they were missing. He went in. Guess what? The infamous foul stench was there.
Yes, as always.
Always. So he decides to investigate. Now, I'm not sure I would. If I went into an abandoned house and it smelled that bad, would I call the police? Absolutely. Would I go looking for what was causing that smell? Nah, I don't think I would.
At the same time, your typical human being who's not, say, a cop or a funeral home worker or whatever, doesn't actually recognize that it's, dead that they smell.
True. Although I'm guessing back then they were probably more familiar with it than we are now. But anyway.
We're just soft city slickers now.
We are. Anyway, he found the decomposing bodies of 3 men in the basement and a trapdoor that led up to the tavern floor. What a shocker. He alerted authorities and search parties were immediately formed. So when searching the barn, they found loose dirt, the infamous loose dirt. They found another body with what looked like an axe wound to his head. They continued to dig and found 7 other bodies, 2 of them women. And although they were well on the way to decomposition, what a happy thought, 3 of the men were identified by their clothes: a Texas cattleman, a Chicago-based salesman, and a Texas merchant named Johnson. They also found a rusty axe with what was presumed to be human flesh still stuck to the blade.
And that's also the notorious axe that you hear about so many times. There was hair, there was blood, there was flesh, there was this. They didn't test it to see if it was animal or,
But in the 1870s, could you?
When was No, but it wasn't that much longer because
I would think
I did that story on the dude with the alligators and they were actually able to test his axe and discover it was horse.
Right. I was going to say, I would think a vet or a doctor would be able to tell.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Like flesh, maybe. Or hair especially. That would be a lot easier.
So, then news came from Beaver, Oklahoma, that the family had passed through not too long before. I mean, they apparently scampered off into the night right before all this shit hit the fan. So they were presumably on their way to New Mexico, and they were flashing a lot of cash. So, a posse of 20 men took off and caught up with them near Palo Duro Creek in Texas. Now, during the pursuit, Kate's horse tripped, and she fell to the ground and broke her neck. And apparently, everybody just rode right on past her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, bye.
Her family, see ya. The pursuers, no. The family didn't even look back, just kept going. So the posse eventually caught Billy and Kit, and William, the dad, escaped. So Kit begged for mercy, but Billy, again, well, it's like something you're going to talk about. They kind of bickered a little, and she was trying to get out of it, and he was like, "You are just as guilty as I am." So she famously said, they got 2 ropes out, they're going to hang them on the spot. She asked her brother if she should tell the whole truth, and he replied, "Let them find out for themselves."
Oh.
So, boop, both siblings hanged on a nearby tree. The posse eventually caught up with William, whose horse had been injured earlier. So they fired 2 more, I don't know if they were warning shots or just bad.
Stormtrooper shots.
Yeah. He stopped and dismounted. And at first he said he had been fleeing for his life afraid of all the murders and disappearances that had been happening where they lived.
I mean, hey.
So, not satisfied, the posse, guess what they did? They hanged him for a bit.
For a bit.
Just like the other guy, the neighbor.
The title of this shouldn't have been about Ken. It should have just been, just hanged him for a bit.
Just hanged for a bit.
A bit.
Then they took him down and asked him if he wanted to confess. He did. He said his entire family had been involved in the killings. The posse stripped him, hanged him, left him there.
Okay.
So the story he told was very similar to the Benders. When a visitor came to the tavern, they would seat him over the trap door and proceed to entertain him with conversation to ascertain whether or not he was wealthy.
Uh-huh.
If he was, the trap door was sprung and either the fall killed him or they'd be finished off later with the axe. So the tale doesn't quite end there because years later, an unidentified man claimed that the Kellys were, in fact, the Benders. He said all claims that the Benders had been captured or killed were outright fabrications and said that this was the same murdering family. However, the age of the two kids doesn't match up at all. It's too much time had passed. So
it's called wishful thinking.
Yeah, no credence is really given to this story. So, since I've already made sure nobody in Kansas will ever want me to come back, I'm going to include one more quick story about another mass murdering family. These are the Staffelbacks and the Bordello of Blood.
Yay!
Now, I can't find the movie Bordello of Blood, which is no relation to the story.
It was on somewhere recently.
I saw him. I checked it. I
watched it.
Oh my God, I wanted to see it because Chris Sarandon is in it and Dennis Miller.
He's so him in that movie.
That's why I wanted to watch it.
Those two, Demon Knight is the other one from that. Demon Knight's a little more quality, maybe, but I love them both in their just cheesiness.
Demon Knight is who, though?
Billy Zahn, Jada Pinkett.
Oh, no, I don't know that one then.
Jada Pinkett. I don't know if she was Smith yet, but
okay,
because she's younger. She's so teeny.
Yes,
but it actually gets brought up repeatedly when somebody asks about horror films with black main characters or whatever because of Jada. All
right, so Nancy Staffelbeck, or I saw it was spelled Staffelback and Staffelbeck.
Yeah, back then when I look at my own ancestry stuff, the name is spelled different every time.
And this was in the same article, so I'm like,
you should see what happens to Kleinian and Knoyer back in that.
Oh, I bet.
Woo!
So she divorced her husband and moved her 3 sons and 2 daughters to Joplin, Missouri. So after her sons, Ed, George, and Mike were put in prison for theft, and Emma and Louisa had become prostitutes, Nancy moved the family to Pickers Point near Galena, Kansas. They lived with Nancy's lover, George Wilson, plus brother George's wife, and 2 other women. So they opened a house of ill repute, a bordello, and besides selling sex, I'm like, was that not profitable enough? Apparently not.
You'd think.
One would think. So they would induce travelers into the brothel with offers of sex, then would kill and rob them. Now, since this is the middle of mining country, or was at that time mining country, there was a plethora of mine shafts in which to dump empty bodies. And that's what they would do. They would yeet the bodies down a mine shaft, which they probably would have continued into infinity, except in July of 1897, I keep doing that. I'll get better, I swear. July of 1897, a miner named Frank Galbraith stopped by. He wanted to see Emma, who was otherwise occupied. He left.
So many euphemisms. Keep going.
He left and came back later. He was told he still couldn't see her, and there was an altercation, and one of the brothers struck and killed Galbraith. They stripped, robbed, and yeeted, as usual. Then they went home where Brother Ed made tamales. This was a big point in this story. Brother Ed owned a tamale cart in town. And after the murder of this particular gentleman, they came home and he made tamales for dinner.
Great.
They sat down to dinner.
Yeah.
So, This time they had picked the wrong mine shaft. So another miner found Galbraith's body and reported it to the police. So it took a couple of days, but the bordello was raided and Nancy and her sons were all arrested. Now her lover, George Wilson, managed to escape. The women actually working in the bordello turned state's evidence and testified to several murders they had witnessed while working there. Fascinating to me, there is no mention at this point of the two sisters. Whether they're included in the women who were working there who turned state's evidence. They just boop, disappear completely from the story.
Okay.
So Nancy was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison, and she died in prison at the age of 81. Ed and George were convicted of the murder and sentenced to life in prison, while Mike was incarcerated on other lesser crimes. And like I said, I can't... Now, is Mike the one who made the tamales? Or was that Ed? No, Ed made the tamales. Yeah. So they were criminally good.
Oh, Lord.
So I was
Why you gotta do me like this?
Like I said, I can't even remember what I was trying to look up when I found the Benders, and I was like, of course, Betty White passed away not that long ago.
Yeah.
And one of her most famous outtakes is when she said, she keeps messing up this take because she's trying to say, I placed that ad when my bender was over. But she kept saying bender over. And that's all I could think of when I was researching this. I don't know why. That's how my brain works. So that's
my brain is bringing up so many things right now. For example, Betty White just died. Sidney Poitier, of course, also died. And I want to put that out there because, gosh, his death and his obituary, I've seen a whole lot less action than Betty White's. And so I want to make sure that's out there for people. So we watched Sneakers last night to celebrate Poitier because it was one of the first things I discovered him, bearing in mind I was born in the late 70s.
Okay.
So... And of course, To Serve with Love, I watched on AMC in the afternoon or something. So that was one of the first movies. But yeah, they're the powerhouses that are in that film, Sneakers. They must have spent all their money on hiring. It's Redford. It's Kingsley. It's James Earl Jones is in it with a small part. Of course, Sidney Poitier.
Oh, I
of course adored River Phoenix, and that might have been his last movie. I don't remember for sure, but it might have been before he died because he's older in it than, say, Stand By Me. But I don't remember.
I thought My Own Private Idaho was his last movie. But
that's what keeps popping in my mind too. And so I don't know if that's a fact or not. Because for whatever reason, My Own Private Idaho is popping in as the last one. So, but it was an indie film compared to this much bigger.
Oh, yes.
This was probably the one that could have launched him. Mm-hmm. Instead of the indie film. So anyway, but I was just watching it, and each new person, what is it, David Strathern or I don't know how to say his name, Strathern. Dan Aykroyd, I don't consider really that caliber, but maybe he is. I don't know. But was it Mary McDowell? I mean, I was just watching it. Every new person comes on screen, and you're like, Jesus, how much did this cost just for the... That's why there's not much in special effects in the show at all, though. Honestly.
Yeah.
There's not. So, pretty low budget other than... So, they could probably afford it. They're like, all right, well, let's get these headliners and we'll sell this movie. But it's a really good movie still.
I remember liking it.
Yeah. But anyway, so something else, I just think it's funny because mine also involves bordello. So, it's like a whole total transition thing.
Wow. We don't plan these. We don't. Please, we are not that organized.
So, I meant to read this in the beginning. I just wanted to quickly update on the Fort Hood. Since I covered Fort Hood in episode 8 or something like that. Sadly... They still haven't found the answers for all the mysterious deaths and the supposed, I'm going to put this in heavy quotes, suicides that I mentioned and stuff like that. Yes. So they're not really trying. But as of December 2021, a bill called the Service Member Safety and Security Act has been signed into law in light of the Fort Hood deaths. And of course, the fact that it came out that this shit was happening at all the bases. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that burst that onto the scene was Vanessa Guillen and her family not letting it drop. Mm-hmm. They fought tooth and nail. They went to the media. This is the only reason we heard any of this shit about all these deaths that were happening. I got sucked down a hole, by the way. I just looked to see if there were updates on things. And just the sheer bullying, the number of the people who died mysteriously or committed suicide, again in quotes. Because, one of them that they said committed suicide was he was in his car and he ran the hose into his car. But here's the thing. He had like 9 stab wounds, and the blanket that had been used to insulate around the hose had his blood in it. And they still declared it a suicide. Like, but anyway, there was so much
he
bullying.
stabbed himself, wiped up the blood, then crammed the bloody blanket into
But they still left it a suicide. I mean, that's the thing. I don't understand what the point in the cover-ups is. I don't get... But anyway, I fell down that hole, and so Jeffrey got to hear all about it, let me tell you. But, so, from this Fox 7 article that I looked at, it is to quote, improve safety on military installations requires military installations to review and improve policies and procedures for reporting missing service members and to partner with local and federal law enforcement to promote information sharing, because that was a huge problem in a lot of this stuff. So I did want to say it was Texas Senator Cornyn, and he introduced this, and it was supported by several Republicans and a Democrat, and it passed. So, I mean... But yeah, it was the Texas guy like, shit, we look really bad right now. I'm going to throw this bill out there. And then Fort Hood also introduced a sexual assault resource center to further support their soldiers, because it's a massive, massive, massive rampant issue on there. So I just wanted to update on that really quick. I think it's a lot of probably mostly lip service. But if these resources are there, if they use them right, if they launch them right, if they train right, they could actually be really valuable. So, yay. I just wanted to...
Yay.
Say that there was something positive that came out of poor Yen and all of these other people. Okay, I'm doing mayhem. It's good, clean fun. Okay. It's the Clown Brawl.
So I'm doing the vicious murders, and
I know!
You're doing the mayhem.
It's a delight.
We're flexible.
It's because I saw a meme on like one of my weird history things, and it was like Clown Brawl, and I'm like, I'm in. But I have a thing about clowns. I love them. Sources: Medium, Salt Online, SAULT, The Spread It. That sounds legit. And News 4. So it was actually really hard to find stuff on this. I found basically 2 legit articles. And then I have a post note that's kind of entertaining as well. Okay. In 1885... Toronto, Ontario was a rapidly growing pioneer town. Immigrants had flooded the town, taking the population up to 40,000. Again, this is isn't the first time where these crimes have happened that we've talked about, that we're in a town that suddenly grew. And the railways were preparing to bring more. It would, in fact, double the population in not too long. It was a city of sin with 152 taverns, 203 bar shops, and tons of brothels. Again, these towns are always like this, where it starts out as like farm, and then some other people come in for whatever racket there is, like a mine or, mills, because there's great trees. I don't know. And what are the first things that spring up, and what does this say about humanity? But anyway...
Bars and brothels.
Well, and it was like 152 taverns, 203 bar shops. So I'm like, is that just a liquor store?
I have no idea what a bar shop is.
But anyway, it was said there were actually thousands of sex workers in this one town because it was all these men coming in for whatever. On the evening of July 2nd, 1885, 3 firefighters from the Toronto Hook and Ladder Firefighting Company showed up to the Mary Ann Armstrong house. It was really just Mary Ann Armstrong's house, which was a brothel with a bar. They called them a hybrid, so they didn't all come with a bar. Prostitution, while not legal, was common in the area, not strictly legal, and officials of all stripes frequented the various houses and streets and therefore did not bust them. There's a really cute, I even talked about it on here now, I can't remember the name of it, with Jack Lemmon and redheaded actress. About like Shirley MacLaine, where he busts some. The cops always look the other way, but he's a newbie and he's all about. He's like, oh, right, lawful, right, or whatever, lawful good. And so we bust some, and it's like this whole big freaking mess. It made me think of that. So, anyways, I was super sad because, as far as I can tell, the clowns were wearing civilian clothes when they came in later. So it kind of ruins my. But anyway, so the firefighters are there. And they're flirting in the bar. This is how this would work. Everybody going there. They'd walk around. They'd drink. They'd meet the ladies. They'd figure out who they were going to hang out with for a little while. I can do euphemisms.
You can.
And then Well, SB Howe's Star Troop Menagerie and Circus was in town.
Wait, say that again.
SB Howe's, Howe, Star Troop Menagerie and Circus.
Star Troop
Menagerie.
All right.
So a bunch of the clowns were like, well, they were horny. So a bunch of the clowns showed up to the Marianne Armstrong house to let off some steam, you know, hang out, chill a while,
have a drink,
take a load off. Oh, almost said something really wrong there. Okay.
Yes. Don't say it.
Again, I think they were in street clothes. But in my head, they're still clowns. And even if they're in normal clothes, they still have their makeup on.
Yeah.
Okay. With a mix of heightened testosterone and alcohol, it was inevitable that things might break down. It happened when one of the lead clowns, he's the only one with a name of the clowns, and they just call him Myers. In the article, he's just Myers. Got bumped by one of the firemen. His name was Fraser. The clown's hat fell onto the floor. Enraged, Myers confronted Fraser and told him to pick up that hat. He thought Fraser had done it on purpose and was bumping him because he was talking to his lady or whatever. And so let's add to this a little fact. The clowns were Catholic. Irish Catholic, and the firemen were Irish Protestant.
Oh.
And that was a massive issue at the time.
Yep.
It was, in fact, an insanely massive issue in that town in particular. Inevitably, the fireman refused to pick up the hat. He insisted it had been an accident. Myers insisted he'd done it intentionally, and it was disrespectful, and he needed to show him respect and pick up his hat. So they start pushing, you know. Then the punches flew. And then soon it's an all-out brawl. The clowns jump in. The firemen jump in. Clowns outnumbered the firemen because there were only 3 firemen. Didn't say how many of the clowns there were. And quickly beat them back. Knowing they were about to get their asses handed to them, the firemen fled. But the kerfluffle wasn't over.
Of course not.
So here's where we get into a little history. Being members of the Orange Order, which was a fraternal organization consisting of Protestant Tories, the firemen had their fellow Orange Order members to go to who would have their backs. This extended not only to police and fire, but to higher ups. In fact, the Orange Order made sure that they controlled who was getting elected to various positions. Ton of influence. So the Orange Order is actually based in Northern Ireland. Just so people know, this was actually the Canada group of them or whatever, order.
Branch.
But it was a huge deal in Toronto. And it earned the city actually the name of the Belfast of Canada. So very heavy Irish population. Very heavy Irish Protestant population. And they're all part of the Orange Order. Yeah. So not only that, but the brawl had occurred on Orangeman's Day. The glorious...
And when is Orange?
12th. It got moved to the 12th of July, but this happened on July 2nd. Huh. So the Orangeman's Day is a day commemorating King William of Orange, a Protestant, defeating King James II, a Catholic, in the Battle of the Boyne, which put Protestants at the top of the heap in Ireland, which is when they were controlling all this. Now, whether it was actually the Battle of the Orangemen then or the day, whatever, the grand blah, I don't know, but there were constantly battles there around St. Patrick's Day and Orangeman's Day, so even if it wasn't on the day, it still would have spiked that.
Right.
Yeah. So the Orange Protestants held a majority of Toronto, like I said, and only about a quarter of the population consisted of Irish Catholics, so they were outnumbered by 75% right there. So the Irish Catholics had ended up there a few decades earlier, during the potato famine. So that's when they had fled there and, hey, there's Irish people here, and then it became the gangs of New York. I don't know. There were at least 22 documented infamous violent issues between Orangemen and Catholics in the city between 1867 and 1892. It just kept happening.
Okay.
And all the people in charge were Orangemen. About a week after the initial brawl, the firefighters showed up to the fairgreen where the circus folks had camped out. They were in the process of taking everything down. They were packing everything up. They were pulling the tents down. They were about to head on to the next town. As far as they're concerned, this was over. They got a little some. They probably went back a few times. Who knows? There were so many brothels, and they just ended up in the one where the firefighters were, and this happened. So the mob of Orangemen cleared out, like walked around to any unrelated merchants and were like, clear out. Take a hike. Get out. Bad shit's about to go down. Warned all those people, and then they surrounded the circus folks. And they told the heads of the circus to hand over the clowns. Give me your clowns!
No, they said, send in the clown.
Oh, God. Send out! They're like, listen, we want your clowns. Send them out.
There ought to be clowns.
We want to rip off our heads. Okay. Of course, the circus folk refused, realizing bad shit's going to go down.
Oh, no.
So, someone did notify the police, but the chief, Samuel Sherwood, was...
an Orangeman.
Oh, yes, he was! He was an Orangeman. So, he figured out what was going down, and he was like, I'm going to put this off. I'm going to ignore these reports, and I'll just tell them that I'm taking care of it, or whatever. So, he delayed responding, but after a while, he did send a couple men, like, go out and check this out. So once more, brawl ensues, this time much larger. That first started with rocks being thrown. Then they started, the firemen started setting fires. Just want to be clear on that. The wagons and circus supplies were destroyed. Someone rang the fire bell, which only brought more firemen to the fight. Being on duty, they brought weapons beyond the rocks that had been used up to this point, and the mob used their pikes and axes to push through the ranks of circus folks. A lot of circus folks got injured. Nobody died. The brawl lasted for hours.
Oh my God.
Just the circus people and firemen and whatnot beating each other up. Some of them jumped in. There was a river or something nearby. They jumped into the water to try and get away. It wasn't until the mayor himself showed up, grabbed an axe from a firefighter, and sent a militia in that the brawl came to a stop. The locals were sent home, the circus told to get out of town, their tails between their legs, their belongings destroyed.
I was like, and how do we do that since you burnt all of our wagons? Motherfucker.
So throughout the brawl, the police had watched. Like, they didn't actually engage actively in it, but they passively let this happen. The chief had actually shown up at one point, and he tried to calm things down and actually got beat up by one of his own, Orangemen. And so after that, his focus was he managed to keep the mob from burning the animals. Because they had cages of animals, and some of them went to... And so he did keep the animals from being harmed. Because that was one of the first things I thought of when they said they were burning the circus stuff. I was like, there would have been animals.
Yeah.
So, as far as I know, no animals were harmed in the making of this brawl. A new mayor, John Beverly Robinson, who was also a member of the Orange Order, but was the first candidate from the Liberal Reform Party in over 20 years, was elected in 1856. And he decided to investigate. He was like, we're going to get down to this because this can't keep happening. Because apparently the frickin' firemen were brawling all the time. His firefighters and police officers had done the exact opposite of what they were expected to do, right? The firefighters set fires. This was unacceptable, and he wanted to hold the involved parties responsible. However, the police officers, when questioned, said, I don't remember who's there. No, I don't remember anybody. Him? No, I don't remember him being there.
I'm not buying it, but yes.
Yep. So, they were, of course, protecting their firefighter brethren. And the thing is, the firefighters had just gotten in trouble a couple weeks previous, before the whole clown brawl, because they were brawling with each other, because at the time each department would get paid per the number of fires they put out. And so two different departments two different companies, right?
Right.
Ended up with the same fire and got into a knockdown drag out while the house is burning down. And then the cops had been sent there and they'd gotten pulled in and then they were brawling. So they didn't say what the result is, but I'm pretty sure the house burned down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was thinking about this and I'm like, I wonder how many times to make some money if it had been slow.
Oh, yeah.
Fires were set by the firefighters.
You know they did.
They had to because they needed to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's just so problematic in so many ways.
Yes.
This incident had been given the name the Firemen's Riot already when they brawled with then I feel like it got even bigger. But so As problematic as the firefighting system was, the police were appointed by city councilmen and given zero training. So if you were the friend of the right person, if you were acquaintance, if you got introduced to the right councilman, you would get appointed and start 2 days later with no training. Angry that the police refused to turn in the responsible firefighters, a new police commission was created, and every single officer and the chief were fired. They then changed the rules and created the Toronto Police Department and started shaping what exists now. And it did say they hired some of the constables back who proved to be good. But yeah, it was no longer a councilman can just appoint you and you don't get training and there are no rules. However, it irritated me. I didn't see anything saying this incident changed how the fire department was run.
Yeah.
And it seems they were pretty fucking problematic. They were the ones beating people up. 17 men were ultimately charged for the riot. One was convicted. It didn't say what the punishment was. I doubt it was. It was probably a slap on the wrist. All right, we've punished somebody for this brawl. The clowns are gone. The circus is gone. What the fuck ever. Let's go on. On a historical footnote, it would be almost 100 years before the Orange Order no longer controlled Toronto.
Wow.
So while searching, this is my footnote, while searching for information on this story, I came across a 2015 article about a brawl between clowns and animal rights protesters in San Bernardino, California. The protesters were trying to break into the Ramos Brothers Circus. It was about 8 p.m. and they were trying to get into the show or whatever. The circus folks claimed the protesters came after them violently and tried to break in. Ramos said that he was hit with his own megaphone and that several female protesters attacked him and scratched his face. They just leaped on him. The protesters, members of Direct Action Everywhere, claimed they were peacefully protesting that the clowns attacked them and that they had been locked inside the grounds and assaulted with weapons. Ultimately, whatever the stories are, and there were hundreds of people who saw it, and the police talked to them, right? No circus employees were ever charged. 2 of the protesters were arrested and charged, so I didn't find an update. I searched for it to see, all right, was anybody convicted?
Yeah.
Nah. So I hope that makes up for the lack of clown imagery in the first story, because these clowns would have been in costume.
But I still like the image of clowns and firefighters. Because in my mind, the firefighters... You want the
firefighters in the big pants that are just hanging down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Brawling at a brothel.
Mm-hmm. It'd be much better.
That's how it played out in my mind.
Well, Yeah, I was reading all the time. I'm reading about it, and I'm like, in my head, of course, yes, it's the firefighters. They've got and it wouldn't have even been the same uniforms then for firefighters.
No, it wouldn't
be different.
And probably not.
But I pictured them with the t-shirts, with the overalls, the suspenders hanging down or whatever, because they're kind of half dressed.
Yep.
And that was my imagery.
And rubber boots.
And it's still in there. That imagery will never go away, no matter what the facts are.
And helmets.
See, that would be a great defense against the clowns. We're going to throw their noses at them. Throw rubber flour at them.
Squirt water. Yeah, squirt water at them.
Like you do with their giant shoes.
No.
And of course, clowns didn't look like that either. No. There's no pictures of that actual troupe or anything. But, looking about it's the more very basic.
Yes.
Cloth. Yeah. So. But honestly, clowns haven't changed that much. Actually, when you look at pictures of old clowns like that, they have not changed that much. They wear more wigs and bigger shoes. And probably more plastic and rubber than there used to be. But yeah. So there you go. That was a light one.
It was.
Shocking, I know. Don't expect it to keep happening much.
No. We'll revert to character.
Switcheroo. Maybe not next episode. Well, next episode I sure do.
Mine in the next episode is, I don't know if I can apply the word lighthearted, but it was an attempt.
It's really lighthearted comparatively.
Yes, compared to what and our guest will be talking about.
So just for a teaser next week, it's entitled "What's Eating You?" Mm-hmm. We have a guest, and I guess you're warned that it involves cannibalism.
Yep.
So
I swear to you, I made it as lighthearted as I could.
So thank you so much for coming back with us in season 3.
Yes,
We're
it's
looking
very
forward to a good
exciting
season with more guests.
Yes.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.